Today on the Solar Podcast, Floatovoltaics. I'm Tim Montague. Welcome to the Solar Podcast. Today, my guest is Chris Bartle. He heads up business development for the floating solar racking company Ciel at Terre. Welcome to the Solar Podcast, Chris.
Thanks, Tim. Pleasure to be here.
I am so excited to take a deep dive into floating solar. I learned about floating solar just about a year ago. I am very slowly developing a project here in Central Illinois that has a floating component. And then I got to visit a Norwegian developer who has quite a bit of experience with FPV, as we call it now in the industry, floating photovoltaics. So it's really exciting to have a direct line to the world leader in floating racking. So thank you for coming on the show. I'm super pumped. We always like to start with a personal vignette, though. How did you get interested in renewable energy and come to Ciel at Terre?
Well, my career path has bounced around in a lot of different directions. I'm a mechanical engineer with an MBA, and I've been in various manufacturing companies and management consulting, internet consulting. Then I got the green bug and got very interested in sustainability and green business almost 20 years ago, and started a green business brokerage and then a green real estate company, and bounced around between tech and green for a while, and kind of always watched solar and was fascinated with it, and thought it would be a cool industry to work in, but never had the opportunity. And I kind of felt like I missed the bus on solar for a while. I had several friends working in solar, and then, as luck would have it, a commercial integrator here in the Bay Area was looking to expand their sales force, and I joined them and worked with them for a little bit before I found Ciel at Terre. Ciel at Terre is a French company, as you know, and they were looking to grow their presence in the U.S. So the position with them was very much entrepreneurial in terms of starting a new office in the U.S., but behind a mature and growing company internationally. So I'm happy to be here on the solar coaster with you all.
Yep, it is that. And, my perception from a very high level is that floating solar is slowly but surely getting traction. 2 years ago, I didn't see hardly any stories. And this year, especially, there's been quite a few. I heard about a project that the Army is doing. I think that's a Ciel at Terre project. I'm not
Yes,
sure.
in
Is that?
Fort
Yep.
Bragg, North Carolina, right?
Yep. And we're going to talk about several of your projects, but so it's definitely gaining traction. And then and there's, the thing that developers and installers need to know is that there is a significant opportunity for photovoltaics in the US. And I don't know if you can put numbers to that, but we have a very large number of man-made lakes and reservoirs. And there's natural features, of course, too, that could potentially, but just the man-made water bodies, right, that are just sitting there for the most part, otherwise doing nothing. And there are some pros of putting photovoltaics on these water bodies. Of course, it's a mixed bag, and not all bodies are appropriate, but we can certainly put solar on a large number of these reservoirs. I've seen numbers, I think upwards of 40% or something like that. So big opportunity. Um, I don't know if you want to say any more about Ciel at Terre before we talk about the U.S. market.
Oh, only that, we're continue to be the leader in floating solar, especially in the manufacturing of the floating racking system that we call Hydrelio. We've installed upwards of 600 megawatts worldwide, over 200 projects here in the US. It's the last or the most recent market we've entered. We were up to about 8 megawatts, 15 projects installed, and looking at many more in the years to come. We are also a developer in other countries around the world, and we're starting to build our project development team here in California and also in the Northeast.
Excellent. Going global. I'm all for it. And so I'm gonna share my screen here in a minute, and we'll walk our listeners through what are the components, and then how does this actually play out in the real world. Tell us a little more about the market potential as you guys see it in the US, though.
Well, NREL has done a couple of studies over the last couple of years. It was almost 2 years ago they released their first study, essentially taking an inventory for the potential of floating solar in the U.S. They looked at man-made water bodies. They assumed a surface coverage ratio of 27%, which is fairly conservative. So they didn't include natural lakes and ponds that people like to boat and fish and swim on. And they came up with a number of 2.1 terawatts of potential for floating solar in the US. And that is, at that time, was about 9.6% of the electricity demands in the entire country. So it's a significant market from that perspective. A more recent report that came out from NREL, I think you were alluding to, looked at the pairing of floating solar with hydro. So putting floating solar systems behind a hydro dam. And then they said the combination of those could provide up to 46% of the power for the country. So it's an enormous potential market. There's limiting factors as well. A lot of these water bodies are in remote areas, so you'd have to build the infrastructure to connect it with the grid. As you said, some water bodies are easier to build on than others, et cetera. So, we're not expecting 2.1 terawatts to come in the next 5 years. So, but we do believe there's a significant opportunity. I think we're going to get into one of the projects we did in California at a wastewater treatment plant. We think that's going to be a big market and already is. We're seeing more and more of those come online, or interest come online in California and in the Northeast. So we're excited.
Yep. Excellent. Yeah, that number, 10%, that's the number I need to remember. We can offset 10% of our electric load with photovoltaics, and that's a real sizable chunk. So excellent. So let's talk about some of the nuts and bolts. I've got one of your slides up on screen. What is floating solar? Let's walk through the components of your system.
Sure. So what you're seeing here is our Hydrelio Classic system. This is the system that has been installed in the U.S. Exclusively. We have a couple of other systems that have been installed in Asia that are a little bit different design, but this is the one that's in the U.S. right now. Each solar panel, each module gets its own float, and that's that float that looks kind of like a wedge shape. It's at a fixed tilt of 12 degrees. And then connecting all of those panels together are a series of secondary floats. And those secondary floats create a walkway between every row. So that's essentially how our systems go together. You assemble the module onto the main float, and then you assemble the main float together with the secondary floats. It's all a very easy construction process.
I'm going to forward the slide. Okay. So here we're looking at some of your projects around the country, quite a diversity of types and sizes. And oh, you even have one there that looks like it's behind a dam.
Yeah.
Sobradinho, where's that?
That's that one, I believe that one's in Portugal. We have one in Portugal and one in Brazil. And the one in Brazil is a megawatt, and they're adding on another 1.5 megawatts. So those are the only two that we've done so far on hydro dams.
Cool. And this is a project in China, obviously very large. You want to give us a real quick?
Yeah, this is,
intro
an
to this?
old abandoned mine in China, and this is one of our first, giant projects over in Asia. It's 70 megawatts, and to this date, it's one of the largest floating arrays in the world. We've just built a larger one in Taiwan. That more will be coming out on that soon too, and we're constantly asked by developers to design and imagine the feasibility for hundreds of megawatts.
Yep. Love it. So the system comes when you're designing a floating solar array, Chris. Walk us through a few of the planning steps for that, and then we'll continue to address your slides.
Well, the first step is for us to take a look at the opportunity. I say to our customers, our customers are developers and EPC contractors, installers, and they find a water body. Their customer may have a water body, and they proceed to design a system on that water body that's similar to how they might design a ground system or a rooftop system. And then they come to us and they find out they can't do what they thought they could do. So we really encourage developers and EPCs to come to us early. There are several design rules that are not necessarily intuitive, that our engineers are intimate with. And we do this at no charge. So we're happy to do early assessments for you. And then we can very quickly price what our racking system would be. And then we also provide documentation and hand-holding, so to speak, to teach our customers, how to estimate and plan for installation costs.
Excellent. And so, there is quite a bit of hand holding, I would imagine, that developers and installers need. Do you end up going on site as well?
Very rarely. We can do a lot of our work with Google Earth, the tool of our trade. And, the thing we need from on-site visits, or at least on-site knowledge, is typically the water depths, the water depth change, the water level variation over time. We'll need that kind of information. But our engineers won't go on site personally until we're training the crew on how to assemble our systems.
Okay. So here we've got your construction slide up. You want to walk us through just that process at a high level?
Sure, sure. So the first step is site prep, and site prep for floating solar is minimal compared to a ground mount system where you may have to remove trees or level a land or trenching, et cetera, that's involved with those systems. So with our systems, the bottom left picture there is probably one of the more complicated and expensive ground mounting platforms, site mounting platforms. If you have a gentle slope bank on your water body, you can just lay down industrial carpeting and assemble the floats on that. So it can be very inexpensive and easy to set up. The assembly is done onshore, so the panels are assembled to the floats, and the floats are assembled together, typically in strings. So if you've got enough shore space, you can assemble a string and then maybe a second string, and then push that into the water, and assemble two more, push that into the water. So it's very much an assembly line kind of process. Very little land space is needed, and the vast majority of the assembly work is done onshore. Once the islands or segments of the islands are out in the water, then the electricians can go out and do the final connections to the combiner boxes. Our systems are in the US exclusively DC on water, so all the inverters are mounted on shore. Could be a central inverter or string inverters, depends how close your island is to the shore, how much shore space you have, et cetera.
Got it. And let's talk a little more about the electrical system. Sometimes people get nervous when you talk about electricity and water bodies, right?
Sure.
How does this work, and how do you maintain safety?
Yeah, so it's really not that much different than a rooftop system. And, the electrical system in a floating array doesn't get any wetter than a rooftop system gets in a rainstorm. So we're using marine grade cabling, especially the home runs there that you see on the right picture that come to shore. That's a floating conduit. So there's things like floating conduit. There's marine floats that I think if you go forward a slide or two might be in here, and you can use our floats too to get that connecting cable to shore. But this is installing electrical systems on or near water is nothing new. Marinas have been doing it for decades or more. So we haven't invented any new technology in that regard.
Sure. And one of the core elements of this is that the array is anchored to the shore or anchored to the floor of the lake or water body with a mooring cable Walk us through some of those elements, and how complicated is the geotechnology aspects of this?
Yeah, so the first step in any floating solar process or project is to design the anchoring system. The anchoring system is arguably the most important component and the most variable component. So every anchoring system is going to be a little bit different. As you can see in this picture, this is a bottom anchored situation. You anchor to the bottom when the shore is too far away, typically is the main reason. Um, and the bottom's not too deep. You know, the bottom anchoring requires divers and equipment that it's more expensive than anchoring on shore. So we always prefer to anchor on shore. The components here, you can see the major component, the major portion of the length is a mooring cable. It's a steel cable. You've got chains and that you can be manually adjusted for a change in water level variation, water level depth change. And then sometimes we use either a polyester rope or a more flexible mooring solution that will allow for stretching, essentially, when we think there's going to be frequent water level change or frequent wind loads. But the whole purpose of anchoring is to hold the island in place under wind, and in California and other places, seismic loads.
Sure. I don't know if you want to say anything more about that NREL study.
I think we covered that. You know, maybe one of the things I didn't mention is that of that 2.1 terawatts of potential, 42% of it is on federally owned water bodies. So this is water bodies owned by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Department of Interior, and others. And then 24% are state-owned water bodies. So most of these sites are going to be government-owned properties.
Makes sense. So electricity is expensive. Water evaporation is a major issue. Yes. Land is expensive and floating solar solves these concerns. Yeah, I'm particularly keen on the evaporation. In California, it's not uncommon now that they cover drinking water reservoirs, right, with black balls to reduce the evapotranspiration or evaporation from the water body, right? Water is a super valuable resource out west. Here in the Great Lakes, we take it much more for granted, and we're blessed with both above and below ground resources, but out west it's a different matter. So has there been any good studies on that particular line item, so to speak?
Indeed, it's a big deal out west. We have one customer that found us because they were looking for an evaporation solution, not because they were looking for a renewable energy solution. So it is a big deal. In LA, to your example, they covered a reservoir in these black balls that I think they're maybe 6-inch diameter or something like that. Just
Hmm.
feel the black balls. I think they may be wishing they thought of floating solar before they did that,
Yeah.
so they're trying anything, and even some reservoirs have permanent roofs over them. But you're right, it's not important everywhere. Another side benefit to floating solar is the reduction in algae growth. So that may be more interesting where you are. But by blocking the sunlight on a water body, you're going to reduce the algae growth.
Yeah, for sure. I have to say we have many man-made lakes in Illinois, and they do get very gross in the summer with algae. Of course, we have lots of farm runoff, so there's lots of nitrogen getting into the water, and the algae just eat that up and go postal. But well, let's dig into this Windsor wastewater treatment facility.
Yeah, this is our first, first significant size project development effort in California. The town of Windsor is in Sonoma County, California, just north of San Francisco, in the wine country up there. And they had this very large pond. I can't remember the exact size of, maybe 10-acre pond. And we covered about a quarter of it with a 1.8 megawatt system. And that system's covering 90 some odd percent of their on-site usage. So it's a behind the meter system. that reduces their dependency on the local utility.
And you can see this is the conduit run right back to shore.
Yeah, what you're looking at here is, just a CAD drawing. It's not an as-built either. This was our proposed drawing. The system's actually a little closer to the north bank there, so the cable run to shore is pretty short. But then those V shapes you're seeing are the anchoring mooring lines. So you can see there's mooring lines going in all four directions, and in this case, they all go to shore. Even that south shore, which is quite far away, they decided they'd rather go across to the shore than down to the bottom.
Mm-hmm. But you were explaining to me that actually the cables are mostly underwater, right? They look like they're above water, but that's just for the schematics purposes, right?
Absolutely. I mean, they're steel cables, so they don't float. So they droop down very heavily, like a power line on a phone pole, that kind of thing.
Yep. Excellent. And here's some photos these are from that particular project, huh?
It
Up
is.
from
This is
Windsor.
Windsor. You can see this is one of our more complex and serious mounting platforms. They had a pretty steep slope to deal with, and they wanted to be able to build in a full string. And I forget how many panels the string was, 20 something panels long. So they built the platform to handle that. The platform doesn't have to be that big. It depends. It's really directly proportional on a couple of things. One, how much shore space do you have? Two, how steep is that bank? And then three, how big a crew are you going to have to assemble this thing? So if you've got a small crew, there's no way that they could push this off the ramp. Yet you have to have enough guys to push that in.
Yep. And so in a way, it really is a s- it forms a mat, right? That is all connected to itself, and then you're building it one row at a time, and then you can actually feed it into the lake while you're building it, right? You don't have to
Right.
build the whole block and then push it in, right?
Exactly. So this 1.8 megawatt system was divided into, I believe, 9 segments. So you build one segment. So you're not building the entire thing at once. You're building a segment at once. So you build the one segment, and then you tow that out into place, and you temporarily anchor it there while you build the next segment. And then you assemble the segments together out in the water.
Got it. The other thing that got my attention about floating solar was the overall speed of installation. I had read about a project in the Netherlands that Re was involved with. They're also in the racking space for floating solar, I believe. And so can you comment about the speed of installation?
So a couple of rules of thumb that we use. 2 acres of water surface is enough space for a megawatt. So 2 acres per megawatt. And of course, that's proportional to what panel you use, what the capacity of the panel is, but that's a rough rule of thumb. The other rough rule of thumb is 2.5 panels or modules per hour per worker on assembly time. So that way you're doing that, and that's for the onshore assembly. That doesn't include the anchoring installation or the on water electrical. But for
Hmm.
the process you were just describing, where you build a couple of rows, slide it into the water, build a couple more rows, slide it into the water, 2.5 panels per hour per worker.
Got it.
We have one project that's just under construction now that is on 2 ponds next to each other, and they've set up 2 mounting platforms, and they're building in parallel. So that's that it's not a technical challenge, that's a management challenge, right? It's how big a crew can you manage, how much parallel work can you manage at the same time. So and so far it's going well.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Um, so I'm also going to show a little video from your website, but what what other projects are going on in the U.S. and how has the U.S. market matured in the last 5 years?
Sure. So I've been with the company about 2.5 years. And when I joined, we do a lot of trade shows, and I do a lot of introductory phone calls, and it was very much, and still is very much, an educational process. But in the beginning, people had never heard of, in the beginning of my career, 2.5 years ago, had never heard of floating solar. They'd walk by our booth at SPI or Intersolar and look at me like they'd never thought of this before. Now, just 2.5 years later, 2 years later, at Intersolar this past January, everyone already knows what floating solar is. So it's not a matter of the initial, just learning questions. It's more about development challenges. Some people even question about anchoring solutions, and it's a much more mature sub segment of the solar industry now. It's grown quite quickly in terms of projects. So we have 15 projects completed in the US. It's about 8 megawatts. The early ones were small, 10K here, 50K here, 30K there, little pilot projects. People wanted to prove it out. But now we're starting to see the projects get much bigger. So 1.5 megawatts in California, which we've been talking about. The largest systems in New Jersey, 4.4 megawatts. And that's almost 2 years old now. And in New Jersey is quite a hotbed. We've got 2 new projects about to start construction. One is 3.3 megawatts at a quarry lake. There was some press about that. And the other is 8.5 megawatts at another water facility. And then there's another one coming online next year that's even bigger than that, all in New Jersey. Florida just finished 3 separate projects and a couple of small ones and 1 megawatt sized one. And then we've got, like you said, the Fort Bragg project coming in North Carolina. So there's more and more coming.
I love it. It sounds like the floating solar market, basically mirrors the traditional solar market. Is that correct?
In which way? I like
Well,
to say
just
we're
like
kind of
where the
lagging.
projects are happening, right?
Oh, sure. I mean, the drivers as far as economics and land prices and utility prices, that all is the same. The same drivers. The best locations for floating solar globally, the biggest markets that took off the fastest were the island nations. So Japan and Taiwan are booming over there. In the U.S., it's not so much islands, but it's population islands. So it's where there's a large population density. So therefore, there's not a lot of land left for utility scale projects, but there is water surface available on surfaces just like you're seeing here in Windsor. So we think that's going to continue to be the case. We're doing our first project in a couple of months down in Texas, where there's plenty of land. But this particular customer, their land, they're an agriculture company. They want to reserve their land for their crops, for their business. They don't want to take it up for solar, but they've got a big irrigation pond on site. They're, I think, concerned about algae growth there too. And so it's a perfect application for floating solar.
Let's talk a little bit about the economics of photovoltaics. How does the installation cost compare to traditional rooftop or ground mount? I guess you're really going against ground mount, but I mean, we do have some megawatt scale rooftops, and so it could be both.
Yeah, so we've got economies of scale happening. We're still small. Our manufacturers are, the floats are blow molded. So it's the same process that's used for food and beverage containers up to larger form plastic containers. So, but we are a very small drop in the bucket for their business. So as that grows, as we have more capacity in the manufacturing plants, I think our prices will come down. We also have a new product that's coming out in 2021 that will do a couple of things. It's going to reduce the form size of our floats, the plastic form. So we'll be able to fit more floats in a truck or a container. So that will reduce the shipping costs. It will also accommodate these larger form panels that are coming out, the 500, 600 watt panels that don't fit on our current product, but will fit on the new product. So we're doing lots of things to bring our pricing down. And, in some cases, we're competitive with a ground mount or a rooftop system. It's not that much more. There is, but you are going to find a premium. I won't lie to you. What I always say is if you've got a big open piece of land with nothing else to do on it, then sure, put a single tracker system out there. But if you've got other things to do with that land, or it's going to be difficult to level the land or prepare it for solar, and you've got a big reservoir that can't be used for recreation, maybe that's a better solution.
Sure. So what else should people know about floating solar? It is still very early days, as we've pointed out. It sounds like New Jersey is the market leader right now. Is that for the foreseeable future, or do you see a pipeline of projects that are going to eclipse what's going on in New Jersey? I think of New Jersey as a good example of a place where land is of a premium. They've actually outlawed, I think, taking agricultural land and converting it to solar arrays because land is of such a premium. It's a small state in a very dense area, right? Being so close to New York City and Philadelphia. My father lives in North Jersey, so I visit there regularly. I went to high school in New Jersey, and I get it. It's a very dense place, so land is of a premium.
Yeah, and there's lots of water bodies too. So I think New Jersey is going to continue to grow. There's an uptick, I would say, in quarry lakes, in sand quarry lakes in New Jersey, and interest in developing those. What we're seeing consistently, across the country is now that there's stories getting out of water districts or quarry lakes or industrial ponds or agricultural irrigation ponds, these examples are starting to be built in the US. Similar or even competitive sometimes organizations are going to want to do the same thing. So for example, in Sonoma County, the Windsor project that we've been talking about went in last year, and we've got the neighboring towns of Healdsburg and Petaluma and Santa Rosa, all very interested in floating solar as well. So it's a great solution, and I think the more it's adopted and accepted in the U.S., we're going to see more and more of it.
Yeah, of course, there's this cost adoption curve. The greater the adoption, the lower the cost, and um, so it's just a great addition to the portfolio that we have, right? Of rooftop, ground mount, and now floating solar. I
Exactly. We did a proposal recently for a corporate campus that wanted to install as much solar as possible to offset their usage. And they maxed out their rooftops, they maxed out parking canopies, they put a ground mount system in, but it still wasn't enough. And they also happen to have a big pond on site. So we put, I think it was 1.5 megawatt, it's just a proposal, system on their pond too. So they covered all the surfaces they could.
Yep. Well, how do Ciel and Terre view the competition? What is your secret sauce, so to speak?
Good question. So we do have competition in Asia. There are a couple of companies out there that have grown quickly, especially in China. We have a couple of European competitors as well. And this is on the product side. So these are competing floating systems. We've got a huge jump on them in terms of first mover advantage. We've installed, like I said, over 200 systems. Nobody else has done that. What goes along with that is our expertise in anchoring those systems. So all of our systems are anchored. The anchoring is designed by us. Several of our competitors leave that to a third-party company. So I just think that we have gotten out there so far ahead, and it's a niche, interesting market that it's difficult for competitors to catch up. We'll see. I always look over my shoulder to see who's coming next. But on the development side, we're not trying to take over project development at all. We're very much interested in partnering with other developers and co-developing if they're interested in that. We really just want to accelerate the adoption of floating solar, and that's what we're doing with our project development business.
Wonderful. Well, I want to make a few announcements. Here on the Solar Podcast, we are bringing you 3 great episodes a week, 2 of the solar podcasts, like this interview we just did with Chris Bartle. And here on screen, you can see where we keep all of these available to the public, cesnrg.com/videos. Just this week, we published 2 interviews, one with Benoit Thanjan on the Northeast solar markets, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and then one with John Powers from Extensible Energy, which is a software solution for load flexibility in the commercial solar market. But literally, we have dozens and dozens of these interviews. We love to do interviews with manufacturers. So if you have a product that is new or established, please reach out to me. I love doing interviews on solar related products or hybrid solar and storage or wind and storage. Bring it on. And if you like our content, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit that bell for the energy transition, share it with your friends, and please comment. I love to get comments from our listeners and viewers. That's how I know that we're making a difference for you. And that's how we get ideas for other interviews and people to bring on the show. We also are doing the Clean Power Hour with John Weaver. Once a week, John and I spend an hour breaking down the latest news on things like photovoltaics. We have talked about photovoltaics a couple of times on the show, so check it out. Well, Chris Bartle of Ciel et Terre, I want to thank you for coming on the show. It's a great privilege to have you and such a innovative global leader in the floating solar arena. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks so much, Tim. It's been a pleasure, and I appreciate you having me on.